Welcome back to Water Quality in the Pacific Northwest. This is Soils 404-504. This is a new course this fall semester. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about introductory material. This first week in class, the first lecture covered basically the syllabus of the class. The second lecture covered public opinion of water quality in the Pacific Northwest. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about water quality indicators. The purpose of this lecture is just to introduce some indicators to you. We will spend a lot of time talking about these indicators as we go through the lectures of this course. Lots of people take water quality samples within the Pacific Northwest. Here's a group of students taking water quality samples on Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. Water quality is something that everybody is concerned about within the region. As you saw in the previous lecture where we talked about the water survey in the Pacific Northwest. Here's a dead fish. This happens to be a dead fish lying in Lake or Winchester Lake in northern Idaho, Winchester Lake State Park. This is a body of water that lost its dissolved oxygen, and as a result, we ended up with a fish kill. So today, again, we're going to briefly talk about some of the water quality indicators that we will talk about throughout the course. So as I introduce these indicators to you, you have to realize that significant time will be spent on many aspects of both surface and groundwater quality as related to these water quality indicators as appropriate. This lecture provides a brief introduction on the specific water quality indicators, which will be expanded over the course. So let's take a look at some freshwater pollutants. First of all, nutrients. You've heard a lot about nutrients in other classes. We'll spend a lot of time talking about nutrients in this class. We'll be talking about nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen and phosphorus cause eutrophication. And in the oceans, nitrogen and phosphorus can cause hypoxia. So nitrogen and phosphorus are major surface water pollutants. Additions of nitrogen and or phosphorus will result in enrichment of stagnant bodies of water, particularly surface waters, where this enrichment results in a condition that we call eutrophication. Again, this occurs primarily in stagnant bodies of surface water. So occasionally we will see eutrophication in lakes, in reservoirs, and in some very slow moving bodies of water, streams that move very slow. Eutrophication is a condition of surface water, and we will spend 2 lectures looking at this process during this course. So it's a surface water quality issue. We also have saltwater pollution with nutrients. This condition is called hypoxia. Hypoxia occurs in coastal waters where we have low concentrations of oxygen in deep waters of the continental shelf. This is caused by nutrient pollution, basically rivers that move off the continent that contain a lot of nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, will cause this hypoxic condition in the offshore ocean waters. So if we take a look at where we see hypoxia, where it's a big issue today, we see it in the Gulf of Mexico, off the mouth of the Mississippi River. Again, the Mississippi River is a river that carries sediments and nutrients from farmland in the heart of the United States. So we're adding lots of nitrogen and phosphorus into these coastal waters. Basically, these nutrients exit farmland and they flow down the Mississippi River. How do we measure hypoxia? Well, we indirectly measure it. The fish catch has been reduced off the coast of the mouth of the Mississippi River, and scientists tell us it's due to the reduced oxygen levels in the seawater there. So the environment is just not good enough for the fish population that used to be there. Again, this nutrient enrichment of coastal waters by nitrogen and phosphorus is called hypoxia. On the land, in stagnant surface bodies of water, we call nutrient enrichment eutrophication. Off the coast, we call it hypoxia. And we will talk about hypoxia when we talk about ocean pollution later in the course. Another type of freshwater pollution we should be concerned about is pollution from pathogens and pathogens that carry diseases. Pathogens in our water, particularly our surface water, make surface water unsafe for swimming, and often it is associated with raw sewage discharges. If we look at the history of humans, we know that throughout history, pathogens have been a form of environmental resistance. And this form of environmental resistance has suppressed the human populations for thousands of years. It's one of the things that kept the human population from growing fast for thousands of years. Even today, pathogens in water are very important. It's believed that waterborne pathogens are currently responsible for over 40% of infant mortality rates on a worldwide basis, primarily in less developed countries. Well, people contact pathogens several ways. Through unsafe drinking water is a primary. They contact pathogens in rivers and lakes with poor water quality. If you're swimming or you're bathing, if you're in contact with surface water bodies and they contain pathogens, you may get a disease. People also contract pathogens through contact with raw sewage and contact with poorly treated sewage that hasn't been cleansed of pathogens. So we will spend time talking about pathogens in this course. We will talk about pathogens and diseases when we talk about drinking water and when we talk about wastewater disposal and solid waste disposal later on in the course. We will also discuss pathogens on a smaller scale when we talk about groundwater quality. We'll talk about nitrate, which adversely impacts infant human health. We'll talk about pathogens here, and we'll talk about pathogens a little bit when we talk about surface water quality. So pathogens are laced throughout the course. We will also spend some time talking about toxic chemicals. And when we talk about toxic chemicals, we're talking about things like pesticides, petroleum products, and toxic metals. So let's look at these toxic chemicals in just a little bit more detail. Again, I'm just introducing these terms, and we'll spend plenty of time talking about them as we go through the course. Well, we'll start with pesticides. We find pesticides in most hydrologic systems on the planet Earth. Pesticides are widely used. They get into the environment many different ways. We find pesticides in groundwater. We find pesticides in surface waters. So as expected, we will talk about pesticides a little bit when we talk about groundwater quality and surface water quality. Pesticides are found in most hydrologic systems. Again, we talked about groundwater, we're talking about surface water. We can find pesticides in drinking water on occasion. And of course, we can find residues of pesticides in our oceans. Because pesticides are found in most water systems, we'll spend time this semester talking about pesticides several times. Continuing with toxic chemicals, talking about petroleum products. Petroleum products contaminate waters worldwide. This is an issue with surface water when we have oil spills. This is an issue in groundwater where sometimes petroleum products leak out of underground storage tanks and contaminate our groundwater. Oil spills on the oceans. And occasionally we run into petroleum products that have contaminated drinking water. So we have plenty of time where we will refer to petroleum products as we move through the course. The other group of toxic chemicals is toxic chemicals, and toxic chemicals can be found in most water sources due to the fact that toxic chemicals are widely manufactured, and through their use and through improper disposal techniques, they can leak into water systems and become serious problems. Another group of water quality indicators are sediments. Sediments we find all over the world. Sediments clog water bodies, and sediments come from many of our industries. We find sediments coming from mining operations, from forestry operations, from agricultural operations, even from urban development. Sediments do several things that cause problems with water quality. First of all, sediments clog rivers. Sediments result in billions of dollars that are spent to dredge harbors and to keep river channels open for shipping. Trade is a huge part of the economy of the planet today, so we have to keep our harbors open and we have to keep our shipping channels open, and we spend many billions of dollars. I believe the cost in the United States last year exceeded $7 billion in dredging, just in the United States. Sediments, again, they do clog rivers. They're bad for fish habitat. They reduce fish spawning in rivers because they degrade the habitat. The bottoms of rivers and streams should have plenty of cobbles, which is good habitat for spawning. Well, sediments get in the river and they put down sand and silt substrates over these cobbles. That makes the environment a lot less attractive to fish and other aquatic organisms that we would normally find in a river. Another problem with sediments is sediments come off land, and phosphorus is often attached to the sediments as they come into the river. Remember, phosphorus causes nutrient aging of water bodies. It's a form of pollution. And any toxic chemicals that are on land may end up in sediments in the water systems. Sediment by itself is the loss of soil from lands. So in areas where you have a lot of erosion, when you have erosion and the sediments wash off the land and into the water bodies, basically you're robbing the land of productivity as the erosive process reduces crop yields and forestry productivity. So we've got many cases throughout the world where crop yields are actually going down, and part of this is because of the loss of topsoil. Well, that topsoil ends up as sediment in rivers. Same thing with forestry. If we don't have good harvest practices, we reduce forest productivity for future forest generations. Another indicator, we look at thermal pollution. Thermal pollution affects fish, and it also affects oxygen levels in water. A lot of people don't think of temperature as a pollutant in water, but it definitely is when we're talking about aquatic life. We will spend an entire lecture on thermal pollution in surface waters in this course. So there's another important biological indicator, or another important indicator. Sorry, it's not a biologic indicator. And then finally, what about water quality measurements that we often take? We can take biological measurements. Let's start with the presence of fecal coliforms. Fecal coliforms, if you find them in water, it indicates that water is contaminated with human and/or animal waste. So that means you have pathogens present. We will spend time talking about fecal coliforms and the contamination of waters with human and animal waste. We'll cover that when we talk about the drinking water portion of this class. Another biological measurement that's not used as much as the others is algae. Algae can be a good indicator of nutrient enrichment in a water body. And there are people that use algae as an indicator of stream health by looking at the quantity and the species of algae that are present. A third biological indicator are the aquatic macroinvertebrates. These are the little organisms that live in streams. They have been found to be a great indicator of water quality in flowing streams. In addition to that, they're also a food source. As a matter of fact, today, if you looked at a stream and you wanted to know something about the quality of water in that stream, you would probably use aquatic macroinvertebrates as your measure of water quality. Because they're important, we're going to spend 2 lectures covering benthic macroinvertebrates in this course. And again, today in the United States, they're the most widely used indicator of stream health. And the fourth biological measurement indicator would be the fish themselves in a stream. They're used as an indicator of the health of the fishery. This can be translated into an indicator of stream health. Even though fish surveys are useful, they're pretty expensive, they're pretty time-consuming, and fish migrate in a stream. Unlike other indicators such as benthic macroinvertebrates, which are relatively sedentary, a benthic macroinvertebrate can tell you the quality of water in the stream at the location you sample. But with fish, when they migrate back and forth, that's not always indicative of the situation you're in. Other measurements we'll take a look at this semester include chemical measurements, things like nutrient concentration, water pH, and dissolved oxygen content. If we look at nutrient concentration, again, nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations are often taken to determine human impact on a surface water body. Earlier in the lecture, we talked about the process of eutrophication. Enrichment with nitrogen and/or phosphorus often cause this problem. Another type of chemical measurement we can take is simply pH. pH is a measure that is often used in lakes and in oceans that often indicates the suitability of a water body for certain aquatic organisms. We have found that in the last few years, pH has become increasingly important for the health, for monitoring and measuring the health of our oceans. And we'll talk about ocean acidification. We'll spend a full lecture on that because it's an emerging issue across the world right now. And the third type of chemical measurement we can take is the dissolved oxygen content of the water. We also know it as BOD, which we refer to as biological oxygen demand or biochemical oxygen demand. And by taking a BOD on a water, it determines the amount of oxygen, dissolved oxygen present in that water body relative to the amount of organic material that needs to be decayed by organisms. So it basically determines if a water body can support a healthy fish population. And we'll talk about BODs, as the BOD concept, as we move through this course. And then finally, we have physical measurements. Things like we measure the turbidity or the clarity of water. We measure the color of water. We may measure the temperature of the water, which we've already talked about, temperature. So let's look at turbidity for a moment. Turbidity is an important measure of water clarity. It's important because people like clear water. But from a biological standpoint, water turbidity is an important concept for benthic aquatic plants that live under the surface of lakes. Benthic plants need clear water because they need to photosynthesize. If the water is not clear, the benthic plants don't survive. Definitely a measure of water quality. Another physical measurement is color. Color is primarily associated with drinking water quality. The clarity or the color of your water is a personal water quality measurement that you would take with your own drinking water. Your drinking water may be reddish in color. You may not aesthetically like that. So you may treat your water to make it clearer. So we'll talk about color as a physical measurement or a water indicator when we talk about drinking water. And then finally, temperature is a physical measurement also. This is a measurement that has been associated with the ability of the aquatic habitat to support a spawning fish population. So this was meant to be a short lecture. This is a short summary of some of the important water quality indicators that will be discussed this semester. So in this first week of the semester, our 3 lectures have been very introductory in nature. Lecture 1 basically was the course syllabus. Lecture 2 was some information on public water surveys. What do the people in the Pacific Northwest think about the quality of their waters? And then thirdly, just to introduce some water quality indicators that are used in surface groundwater, the oceans, and in drinking water. So we'll get down to the meat of the course when we move into the second week of the course next week. Thank you for your attention. We can take physical measurements, we can take chemical measurements. So let's look at some of the biological measurements that are often taken to indicate the quality of water. These could include the presence of fecal coliforms, the presence and types of algae that are present in the water body. We could measure aquatic macroinvertebrates in a stream system. And of course, we could take a fish census. All of these are the types of biological measurements that we could perform that would basically tell us how good is the water quality. And again, we're talking about surface water quality right here. So let's look at each of these 4 for just a couple minutes.